Today's story will leave you speechless. It's hard to imagine, but a Filipino betraying his own country. And for what? His personal gain. But here's the real question. How did he do it? What exactly did he do that could be seen as a betrayal? And to make matters worse, this wasn't just any ordinary citizen. No, he was a politician, someone who was trusted by millions to lead the nation, make things better, and uplift people's lives. Instead, he chose a different path. Fidel Ramos, often remembered as FVR, served as the 12th president of the Philippines from 1992 to 1998. His presidency came at a time when the country was struggling to bounce back from the shadow of martial law and financial hardship. Under his leadership, the Philippines saw major economic growth, the restoration of democracy, and a renewed sense of national pride. But like many leaders before him, Ramos's legacy wasn't without its controversies, particularly when it came to the sale of Filipino properties. Before diving into the details of how he sold the country, let's first highlight the good. What exactly did he accomplish during his time in office? How did he work to improve the lives of everyday Filipinos? One of his key initiatives was Philippines 2000, an ambitious development plan aimed at privatizing and deregulating major industries like electricity, telecommunications, banking, domestic shipping, airlines, and oil. He also introduced reforms in the tax system and managed the country's external debt through smart debt restructuring and strategic financial planning. By 1996, something remarkable happened. The inflation rate had dropped from a staggering 9.1% in 1995 to just 5.9%. But that wasn't all. By the late 1990s, the Philippines' economy was getting favorable comparisons to powerhouses like Taiwan, Thailand, South Korea, and Malaysia. A turnaround like this didn't just happen by chance. During his presidency, Fidel Ramos set in motion several key economic reforms. He aimed to open up a once-closed national economy, breathe life into private businesses, attract more local and foreign investments, and, most importantly, tackle corruption. He had a vision. Ramos wasn't just known for his reforms. He was also known as the most traveled Philippine president. His journeys across the globe brought in about $20 billion in foreign investment, a number that significantly boosted the country's financial outlook. He wasn't stopping there. In November 1996, he brought the world's attention to the Philippines by hosting the 4th Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leaders Summit. And let's not forget his tax reforms, including the controversial value-added tax, VAT, which jumped from 4% to 10% under pressure from the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. But here's where things take a turn. While Ramos had good intentions, his methods had unforeseen consequences. His efforts to revive the economy and improve Filipino livelihoods came with a cost. Selling off state-owned assets to private companies was meant to lighten the government's financial burden and invite foreign investments. However, the manner in which these sales were conducted and the motivations behind them have left many questioning if it was truly for the country's good. Sadly, many Filipinos bore the brunt of these changes, and the negative effects on the economy were undeniable. Critics argue that many of these prized properties were sold off for way less than their true value, costing the country a fortune. These weren't just any ordinary sales. They included some of the most valuable pieces of land in the Philippines, from prime locations in Manila to vast rural territories. The scale of these transactions was unprecedented, leaving many to wonder, why were these assets really sold? Who benefited from these deals? And more importantly, how did this affect the Philippines and its people? Ramos might have had good intentions, or at least that's how it appeared on the surface. But if you dig deeper, there was more at play. Yes, he aimed to help the country, but there was also the matter of benefiting himself. When Fidel Ramos took office in 1992, the Philippines was in a period of significant transition. The country was still reeling from the long and difficult rule of the Marcos dictatorship. Ramos, a former military man turned statesman, promised a brighter future, one filled with progress and prosperity. During his presidency, Ramos spearheaded major economic reforms, opening the economy to foreign investors and boosting tourism. His focus on infrastructure led to new roads, bridges, and public buildings. The country's economy saw steady growth, with GDP climbing, inflation dropping, and even the nation's international credit rating improving. People began calling the Philippines Asia's next economic tiger. But even with these achievements, Ramos couldn't escape controversy. His solution to the nation's financial woes involved selling off government-owned companies, a move that sparked heated debates. Was this really the best way to tackle debt? Many questioned whether the country's assets and sovereignty were being protected in the process. One of the most hotly debated moves during Ramos's presidency was the sale of key properties, starting with Fort Bonifacio, a military site of immense historical and strategic value. This decision sparked public outrage. Many were concerned about the nation's security and the lack of transparency in the process. But it didn't stop there. Another controversy stirred when plans were announced to sell the iconic Manila Hotel to a foreign company. For many, this hotel was more than just a building. It was a symbol of Filipino heritage, and the thought of it falling into foreign hands raised fears about protecting the nation's identity. Then came the sale of the Energy Development Corporation, a core part of the Philippine National Oil Company, and a major player in the country's energy sector. People were left wondering, how wise was it to give up control of such a crucial resource? Sure, private companies have the funds, the capital, the resources to invest in projects and keep things moving. But here's the catch: private companies are in it for profit, and profit-driven motives don't always align with the public's best interest. What does that mean? Even if the public suffers, that's not their priority. These sales sent shockwaves through the nation, igniting a fierce debate. Critics accused the Ramos administration of being short-sighted and lacking transparency. Yet, despite the public outcry, many of these deals pushed through. And the Philippines? Well, it was left to grapple with the consequences. On one hand, these sales brought in significant foreign investment. There was a construction boom, and new jobs were created. But here's the flip side. Ownership of critical assets shifted from Filipino hands to foreign companies. The economic benefits weren't equally shared. Cities thrived, while rural areas continued to struggle. This gap only deepened social inequality. And to make things worse, the rapid urbanization triggered by these sales had serious environmental costs: deforestation, pollution, and threats to biodiversity. Culturally, the influx of foreign investors wasn't without consequences. As they moved in, local traditions and customs often got pushed aside, eroding the rich cultural heritage that had been part of the Filipino identity for generations. But that wasn't the only challenge the country faced under Ramos's presidency. Power outages, or brownouts, became an everyday struggle. For nearly a year, the nation dealt with frequent blackouts, all because the demand for electricity had outpaced the country's outdated energy infrastructure. The old, poorly maintained power plants and a lack of investment in the energy sector left the country in the dark, literally. And if that wasn't enough, the 1997 Asian financial crisis hit hard. The Philippine peso lost half its value, and the cost of contracted electricity skyrocketed. Suddenly, electricity prices in the Philippines became the second highest in all of Asia, trailing only behind Japan. But let's rewind for a moment. Even before this financial storm, the country was already seen as a risky bet by investors. The political landscape was unstable, with coup attempts and military unrest, like Gregorio Honasan's coups during President Aquino's term, and power shortages were rampant. Imagine brownouts lasting anywhere from 4 to 12 hours. It's no wonder foreign investors were hesitant to dive in. In spite of these challenges, Ramos managed to push forward a unique strategy. build, operate, transfer (BOT) schemes. The government, strapped for cash, invited private investors to build and operate infrastructure like tollways, power plants, and railways. After a set period, ownership would be transferred back to the government. It was a bold move, and at the time, the country had little experience with such schemes. But as time went on, the cracks began to show. Shifts in exchange rates and changing business conditions led many to argue that the contracts unfairly shifted too much risk onto the government and ultimately the Filipino people.